Hello friends, this is a slightly different video from the usual. I have a topic I want to discuss today, and then what I'll do is at the end I have a few little updates to push out. I'll start by saying that probably haven't seen much from me in terms of progress with figures in the last few weeks, and that's only because we've had 4 guests with us from Greece who've never been to the United States or Canada before, and so my time in the hobby bunker has been severely limited. Firstly, because they are occupying that space, and it's obviously not ideal for me to constantly be nipping downstairs when I have guests staying there. The second thing is, of course, that I'm busy trying to be a good host and show them around and stuff. So the sort of slightly monastic or hermetical act of painting figures is probably not ideal when one has company. So that's why things have been a bit quiet on my front. I have been getting little bits and pieces done here. I've been squirreling away, a half hour to do some rebasing or whatever while they've been out and about with my wife. And then, of course, work doesn't help either, just busy, busy, busy. But I have been working on the sidelines when it comes to my Crimean project, alongside doing some other bits and pieces in both 15 and 28 millimeters. So when they move on to Texas to go visit the rest of the family, I will be able to reclaim my space downstairs and hopefully do some photography and show you guys what's been happening. So anyway, the topic of today's video is Russian greatcoats in the Crimea. It's not a very sexy topic, I imagine, but I think it's one that needs to be discussed because there's several conflicting things that I've seen so far as I do my research into how to paint the figures, right? And it's a classic case of, as a wargamer, when you're confronted with a vast horde of figures to paint that are more or less all going to be the same, there is a tendency towards conservatism in getting started, because you don't want to just crack on and start painting and then realize that you've got to go back and fix things, so this is one of the reasons why I've been asking so much in my last few videos about the color to paint a greatcoat, and trying to get as many sort of opinions on that so I can figure out what color I think is a sort of ideal color, and then I can create variations off that. But I always want to feel like I'm in control when I do that. In other words, that I'm planning through the process, that it's not just merely reactive, or that I'm just picking stuff up from wherever and hoping for the best. It's not that I expect my figures to be 100% historically accurate. I don't think that's possible, but I do think that we put so much love and care into the process that it behooves us as wargamers to take a little bit of extra time to really give it a think, and do our best, I think, to sort of represent history on the table as best we can, if of course that's what we want to do. I mean, there's nothing wrong with just deciding you're going to do your own thing. They're your toys, you can paint them any color you like. It might just look a little bit funny. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is the greatcoat specifically, and I thought we'd start here. This is a painting from 1971, so it's obviously not contemporaneous with the conflict, but it's one of the few paintings that I found that gives you a close-up shot of the collars of the greatcoat, and that's really what I'm concerned about here. So generally speaking, the larger areas of the greatcoat are relatively easy to pass. In other words, they're sort of a grey, green, brown color, this sort of mushroom color, I guess, that we've been agonizing about for weeks. This painting has chosen to go for a slightly more brown grey, I would say, a sort of very pale brown, with very little green in it, which is fine. I've also found it curious that the Furushka is almost blue tinted in this picture, which probably would indicate to me that these might be naval troops or something, but there's no indication, given that these are Scots charging. My thought would have been that this would be, and at the Alma, this would have been the redoubt, and I don't think the naval troops are holding that. Then equally, the band of the Furushka here is a sort of pale brown color, almost like a yellowy color. My understanding is that would have been red, but I could be wrong. One of the sources that I'm using for my project is a little booklet, well, for the Russian part anyway, is a little booklet called Crimean War Basics, Organization and Uniforms by Michael Cox and John Lenton. It's a slim little volume written in that wonderful typewriter style. If you look back a few videos, you'll see when I showed that off. It's by no means new. This was reprinted in 1997. This edition, sorry, that I have was a 1997 reprint of a 1977 booklet, and it has that lovely typewriter font as I went on about then. In this, there's a whole section with orders of battle for the Russians, for the various battles, and then after that, there's a small section on Russian uniforms, and it goes through all the details such as the cavalry uniforms, what color helmets they had, the overalls, girdles, and so on. And eventually you get to the line infantry, right? And it splits out the line infantry from the Jaegers. Now, Jaegers formed their own battalions, right, and their own regiments, and they were paired off basically in brigades, and then there would be 4 regiments to a division. So think about it like a regiment, 4 battalions to a regiment, 1 regiment, 2 regiments to a division, and it would be twinned. So it would be a case of having like the first and the second line would be twinned together as a brigade, sorry, and then you would have a division which was the first and the second brigade, for example, and that would be 2 twinned line regiments and 2 twinned Jaeger regiments that would form together. There's no real indication that the Jaegers fought in any different manner from the line. From what I can read, it sounds like they basically just operated more or less in the same kind of giant assault columns. There are just some minor uniform differences. Now, this booklet describes the greatcoats as follows, because it differentiates between the jackets, which are dark green, with red collar and cuffs and piping along the front. And the red collar piece is very important there, I think, because it then talks about the greatcoat. And for the greatcoat, it says brown grey, shoulder boards as for the coatee shoulder straps. And so those are basically designated. If it is the first regiment in a brigade, it's red, and if it's the second regiment in a brigade, it's white. And then it says collar patches were as follows, and these are divisional based. So it's first regiment in the division is red, second regiment in the division is light blue, the third regiment in the division is white, the fourth regiment in the division is dark blue. Now, the key difference between the Jaegers and the line is that the Jaegers have slightly different colors for their shoulder straps, right? The first regiment in the brigade has light blue, and the second regiment in the brigade has dark green, sorry. So I think it's easiest to demonstrate what I'm talking about using this spreadsheet that I've created. This is my sort of work in progress Ulmer order of battle, and this is just for the 16th Division, right? So as I said, the 16th Division would be made up of 2 brigades, right? And handily, this little booklet gives you the actual formal breakdown of that. So if we look for the 16th Infantry Division, the 1st Brigade is the 31st Regiment, which is Vladimir, which you can see that I've marked it there. The 2nd is the 31st Regiment, is the Suzdal Infantry Regiment. Then we have the Jaeger Regiment Uglitz, and then we have the Jaeger Regiment Kazan, which I've marked there as well. So you'll see there's 4 battalions per, and I've laid them out here in the order. Now bear in mind that this is the this first brigade, and then this is the second brigade. Now I said earlier that the line infantry, it states that the shoulder straps are as follows. The first regiment in the brigade, so bearing in mind that these 2 regiments here form a brigade, the first 2 regiments will have red shoulder straps, and I've created a column that says shoulder straps in red, yeah. And then I've got the second regiment in the brigade is white. Now we also said that with the Jaegers it's slightly different, right? So I looked at the booklet here, and it says that for the Jaegers you go light blue and then you go dark green. Okay, so that's the shoulder straps sorted. The belts, it states here for the equipment, it said that the white leather belts with the black ammunition pouch. Note that the 4th Regiment in the division had black equipment. So that would indicate, because this is a division of 4 regiments, the fourth regiment would be the Kazan regiment. They would have black belts. So that's that sorted. And that's kind of how I've synthesized that. Now it gets confusing when you look at the part where it talks about the collar patches for the greatcoats, right? So we're back to this collar patches business, and this will come up later. So let's talk about it now. It says that the collar patches in the division are as follows, right? It says first regiment in the division is red, then the second regiment in the division is light blue, then the third regiment in the division is white, and then the fourth regiment in the division is dark green. That would mean that this light blue here would actually be applied to the Suzdal infantry regiment, and the white would swap down here to the Uglitz Jaeger regiment, and you end up with a weird situation where the shoulder straps would be light blue, and then the collar patches would be white, and the Suzdal infantry regiment would have the white shoulder straps and the light blue collar patches. I'm trying to rationalize this, so please, if anybody knows, has like an answer on this, please do let me know. But in my mind, I would imagine that if we think about this division here of 4 battalions, right? 4 regiments, sorry, and we have the first brigade, first regiment. Then we have the first brigade, second regiment. Then we have the second brigade, first regiment. I think in terms of seniority, it is probable in my mind, based on the color matching here, that the first regiment in the division would be considered the Lion Regiment 1. The second regiment in the division would be considered the first regiment in the second brigade, in other words, in the Jaeger brigade. That's part of the division, and then it would go third and then fourth. And this reading of that order of things would imply that the order is matched on the shoulder straps. In other words, if the shoulder straps are red, then the collar patches are red. If they're white, it's white, light blue, dark green, dark green. I find it very difficult to believe that you would see this swapped around, so you'd have white shoulder straps and a light blue collar patch. But I could be wrong, and if I am, please do let me know. I'm just trying to rationalize something that to my eye looks wrong and doesn't kind of seem to work, but there do seem to have been very strict rules about it when it comes to the way that the Russians kind of structured their forces. Now, all of this is to say, where are these bloody collar patches? So what I want to go do quickly is show you, if we go back here, we're looking at our picture here, you'll notice that this artist has drawn the collar of the greatcoat in the same color, the same material, same fabric. The shoulder straps don't have really much color on them at all. They have a little dot of color by the looks of it, but they're certainly not solid color, which is what we expect. So I'm not sure whether or not this painting is all that useful to us, right? Now, I then thought, okay, well, let's check the actual figures themselves and see if anybody gives us an indication as to what to do here. So there's a few things to notice. These are the Great War figures, and you'll see they have this lovely turned back cuff, and that is just the same color as the coat. Then we have the strap over here, which is the colorful piece that we just described in the spreadsheet, and then we have a collar here. Now, the question is whether this collar is actually part of the greatcoat, or if it is the coatee or the tunic collar sticking up beyond the greatcoat, and that's the piece I'm not sure about. Again, if we look at, there are no really good painted examples on the Great War Miniatures website that show the necks very well, so that sort of even their regimental example isn't great for us. But we can try and use Foundry here. Obviously, it's not where the issue here is, like, a war games manufacturer might not be the best source for source of truth for us. But I think that when we're sort of in this situation, we sort of cast our eyes about and see what we can find. So if we look at these figures, you'll notice, you won't because it's very small, but if I zoom in, there's like a dash of red near the neck on those helmeted fellows. Now I need to try and get the zoom back again. I'll just go back a page. Let's go back a page, and then you can see here they've done it doesn't help when I highlight, but if you look at this box here, you can see that there's red at the neck of the musician and of the standard bearer. I'm trying to find examples. Here there's no colouring at all by the looks of it near the neck. This uniform is different, so we'll sort of ignore it, although it is still a greatcoat, and I can see red at the neck. These are shell coats and therefore not that useful. And here, this is probably the best, these are the best examples, I think. So if we look at these chaps here who are advancing, you'll notice a very prominent red collar. Okay, but if we go back a page and we go back to the other figures, you'll notice that these guys have the collar is the same color as their coat, which then leads to the question, well, where are these collar patches? Now, they may not have painted them on these figures. That's fine. I can imagine it's probably a bit of a pain if you're doing, hundreds of these guys. But the question then remains, what color are the collars, right? And what collars are we actually looking at? Are we looking at the coatee collar that's poking up out of the greatcoat? Because in my mind's eye, the greatcoat collar would probably have a lapel and fold down, I would imagine. But I don't know these things, right? Because I don't actually own one of these coats to look at. So I then thought, okay, well, I've mentioned this in the past, but let's look at Matakishi's website, because he's done a lot of work here. And do apologize for the speed of my internet. I do live out in the Bundus, so it's not all that great, the internet speeds. So let's have a look here. We can see that he's gone for the collar to matching the shoulder boards with these infantry here, which I think is pleasing from a wargaming perspective. So here he's done the white straps on the shoulders, and it looks like he's done a white collar as well, but the whole collar, yeah. And so that seems to have been his method there. Let's see here, maybe there's another example. Yeah, so this is red collars, red shoulder straps, and that works for me. I think from a wargaming perspective, it's both pleasing to the eye, it's easier to paint than a tiny little patch, but also it should look pretty good from a distance. So that seems to have been Matakishi's method. Although I will say, I believe if we scroll down a little, that he has taken some liberties with uniforms at points, if I recall correctly. So let me just see here. As we go down together, there's a bit, I think he painted one of his Russian regiments with colored cuffs, or maybe he fixed them later or something. Oh, no, here they are. So this is, here he's gone the whole hog, and he's actually just given them like blue cuffs as well. And, that might be an artistic flourish. I can't speak for him. I don't think it looks bad. I think it looks really nice, actually, but probably not something I will do. Okay, so that's Matakishi's take on the situation. The other thing I then looked at was, this is a great website for anyone who's into collecting the Crimean War. It is called Tales from GHQ. Fantastic blogger, very active on the Lead Adventure forum. So again, I would highly recommend that if anybody is interested in the Crimea, but also in other stuff, do check out this website. And here's the problem I have, right, is that every time everything has to load on my computer, it takes 20 minutes. So you'll notice that he's opted for the red collars and the shoulder straps. Now, so again, these are this person's figures, and they can paint them any which way they like. I've said that at the front, and I'll stick with that sort of dictum, which is that you do what you want. Another thing I've observed also, and this is an aside and has nothing to do with greatcoats, is I've seen a lot of people do their Russian battalions with two flags. Most figure manufacturers provide you with two standard bearers per command pack, but from all the reading I've done, it appears that the Russian battalions only carried a single flag and not two flags. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do in that case, because on the one hand I want to use the figures, right? On the other hand, I just don't think that they should have two flags. I think it's one of the things that sets them apart from the British. The French also carry only a single flag, and as far as I can tell, the Ottoman Turks are the same as well, with just a single flag. So that's Tales from GHQ's take on the whole greatcoats and collars in particular. And he's varied his colours quite wildly. He goes from a sort of pale brown all the way to a grey. I think he's gone for greys for his officers, because presumably they have a much nicer manufactured greatcoat. So, I suppose it is what it is. Again, stylistic choices are totally valid here. I then did some more digging, and I found a Russian website that claimed that it could shed some light on this. So the uniform of the Crimean War. And what I found interesting about this is, I talked earlier about the greatcoat having like a lapel or something, or a collar, maybe that buttons up or something. Based on this painting here by AI Gobbins. It's Adolf Gobbins or Gabins is sometimes the name that they give. You can see that the officers have got dark collars, and those dark collars to me would imply that they're the same green as their like uniform, which would be underneath the greatcoat. But the greatcoat specifically here does not have a collar of its own. It looks like it's just basically a round cut hole, and I'm not sure if that's really what a greatcoat looks like. Then there was another picture in here which looked quite interesting. So again, here we can see there's a fellow lurking in the back, and he just seems to have the sort of crew neck greatcoat that buttons up and presumably is just a hole, right? And but here, if we look in the back, we'll see there's somebody who actually has a proper collar that seems to um, sort of lapel over, kind of like a collar on a shirt, like a modern shirt. I then also looked at this picture here, it's the same artist again, and you'll notice that there's two chaps here wearing greatcoats, and they do have the collar patches. So you'll see that the coat itself has a folded over collar that partially obscures the shoulder strap where my little microscope is right now. I wonder if I click on that if it'll be helpful. It might also not be helpful, so let's see what happens. It takes a moment again because my my internet's very slow. It's just a product of living where I live. Not massively increased, but you can see here there's a collar patch there, and you can see that the collar folds down and over. Now, none of the figures we've looked at so far seem to show that folded down collar, and I have a theory as to why that might be, and I'll get to it in a minute. But here's a closer up of the Pavlovskys from 1831 to 1850. You'll notice that the sort of dark collar with a tab right there, so that might be a collar patch, but it implies that the collar itself is stiff and upright rather than folding down. And again, the same thing here. Now, as I was going through here, there was another example. So again, this is the same artist, but here the greatcoat, and these look like private soldiers rather than any kind of NCOs or anything. And you'll notice that he has a collar that is quite tight to the neck. So it's very difficult, even with the same artist, to understand what's going on here. And in the same vein, this one's this is from the Sevastopol panorama. I don't know who the artist is, but here we're looking from the back of the Russian soldiers, and you can see there's a red collar there, and you can also see them there. So we're getting mixed signals, right? It's clear that it's very difficult for us to get a clear read on what's going on uniform-wise. So I thought the next best thing would be to see if there was anybody who created like a replica, right? So I found this is Gabriele's replica. It's a company in Sweden, I believe, who make reenactment items. And you'll look from this painting, you can see that we've got the stiff upper collar, but it's dark green with a collar tab. Again, implying that collar might be material that's sewn onto the outside of the collar of the greatcoat. I'm not sure. It's just not very clear to me. Now, this is a description. The Russian overcoat of pattern 1850 to 54, as worn during the Crimean War, or 1862, as worn in the Russo-Turkish War of 1877, Siege of Pleven. Reconstructed from contemporary photos, the text of the official regulations, and drawings taken from authentic original extant examples preserved in Russian museums. It was made of a heavy, thick wool, grey-beige melange kersey cloth, faced with the same cloth at the front and lined with natural hemp canvas in the body. The double-breasted overcoat is fastened in the typical Russian style with a single row of buttons of brass or pewter at the center front and hooks and eyes at the edge. Colored collar according to regiment. Please specify. This overcoat can be made for both infantry and cavalry regiments, Jaegers, artillery, etc. Please inquire. So, it just says here the officer's version is made of a finer cloth and features a padded silk lining, which makes sense because officers typically have nicer kit, right? So here's what I found. Okay, so if you look at the collar here, you will notice that this shows a folded down collar. Now, we've not seen that on any of our figures, have we? So far, we've only seen a sort of more upright collar that kind of looks like this. Then the issue becomes, okay, well, if it is kept up like this as a kind of like maybe to keep heat in or whatever. Mind you, from all the reading I've done, the greatcoat wasn't particularly thick compared to the coatee. It was actually slightly more breathable than the coatee itself. That's why it was favored over the thicker tunic. Again, I'm just working off the sources I have, but to my eye, it would look like what we are looking at when we look at these figures. As I said, is either that the collar has been cut off to allow the tunic collar to poke out, or that this collar is kind of kept up perpetually in a sort of Fonzie-esque cool guy 1950s way. But then that would imply that these collar tabs are going to be obscured, because from this picture I can see a collar tab here, but there's no indication that it's also on the underside of the collar, although this picture would contradict that. So it's unclear, even with this design, what the truth really is, you know. And again, this picture gives us a good example of where the collar tab sits, but notice how it obscures the shoulder boards. So I really don't know what to do here. It would imply to me that it looks to me like this is an Osprey plate, I believe. I think this is an Osprey plate. I think I have this one. And you'll notice that it's a dark collar with a tab on it, and likewise here, also with a different colored tab on it. But the dark color to me would indicate that it's likely going to be a dark green, not a black. And then the tabs are on the collars, but those collars look like they belong on a shell jacket, not on the overcoat. I actually have this same plate. I'll show it in a bit more detail in a minute. And then likewise, I have this one to show in a minute in more detail. But it's clear they've worked off the Osprey plates, and these designs, which look like they are from 1862, because it's all in Cyrillic, right? So I'm guessing this is probably what they're working from. Indicate to me that this has a folded down collar, or that at least a collar that's meant to be folded down, but likely that could be kept upright. But I'm not sure, based on the figures that we've looked at. So if we look here, the join between the two collars here looks too tight to be just a collar that's folded up in a sort of cool guys 1950s way. So I really don't know what to do here. I suppose we have to make a decision, don't we? We've got to decide, do we think that the collars are coatee collars that are poking out, and then maybe the folded collar is obscured? Because that's also another option, right? It might be that these cross belts are covering the actual collar that is there, that's folded down, so you can't see it. You know, it's not, they don't pull the collar up and over the coat, the cross belts, but rather that it's obscured underneath them. And then this paint scheme would be incorrect, because this would actually be the coatee collar that's protruding out from underneath the greatcoat. Again, if anybody has any great ideas, or maybe can explain how they rationalized it on their side, I'd be all ears. I think at smaller scales, it doesn't really matter so much, because you don't really get to see that. But at 28mm, it's a feature, not a bug, and it needs to be painted, right? The collar, it's got to be a color of some sort, and I've got to make a decision before I embark upon too much work, because I currently have some test figures on my table. I got some of the colors that were recommended to me, and I'll talk about those in a separate video. But I do think there's a question here about the collars, and I don't want to seem overly like rivet countery, but I do think that there's, again, I said, if I'm going to make the commitment to painting the figures well and putting in all the effort, I'd like it to at least look kind of, I'd like to be able to research as best I can. So I thought I'd then show you, this is a very old Osprey, which is the Russian uniform of the Crimea. And in this one, they don't have too many pictures of just general line troops. This is basically the only plate that has them. It seems to really weirdly focus on Imperial Guard. But what's cool about this one is it shows you a grey collar with the patch, but the patch is on the outside. And so this would kind of speak to the fact that the collar might be part of the great coat, and that troops just simply folded it up into an upright position as they were operating out in the field. Maybe there was some kind of like fastener or something to keep it closed, and that the tab wasn't just on the inside, it may also have been on the outside. This is a slightly older osprey. The newer osprey is this one. Okay, this is probably the one that most people are familiar with. And if you look here, you'll see this is because he's a gunner from the horse artillery, so we'll skip him for a minute. But you'll see this chap here. He's from the Dniprovsky regiment at Balaclava. You'll notice a few things that contradict what our reading so far, what our discussions thus far has talked about. It also has white shoulder straps, which would imply that it's the position of the regiment within its organization that would determine that, right? So what I can do is I can look up the 24th Dnieper. They're from Dnieper. They are the second. They are the second line infantry regiment in the 12th Infantry Brigade, Division, 1st Brigade. So they would be. So the first one is always red. So hang on, let's double check ourselves. But the first regiment is always red shoulder straps. The second is always white. Now this is where things get tricky. Remember I talked earlier about the light blue with the great collar patches being light blue. Well, it looks to me like the artist here has gone for the red collar, which appears to be generic across the board for everyone. And if we look at the actual uniform design for the coatee is described as being dark green with a red collar and cuffs. So this would imply that the collar is just poking out from underneath the greatcoat, right? So then what's happened to the greatcoat collar? And that was where my comment about folded down underneath the belts comes in. But I can't see that here, so I'm not sure if this is just kind of a mush that the artist has made for the sake of expediency. So I'm at a bit of a loss here. This is another example. So here they've got the red collar, but then if we scroll down, we get to some Jaegers, and the Jaegers here, for instance, have a dark collar, which would likely be dark green with a sort of slight trim, a white. They have the black webbing, cross belts, which would imply that they're part of the 4th Regiment of a division. It's not clear if that's the case here. And then I would say no, because the even numbers would be the last regiment in a division. The odd numbers would typically be the first in the brigade, right, and therefore not the 4th in the division. So there's like a mathematical thing that doesn't work out here, and I think what it comes down to is perhaps the uniforms here are not that well researched by Osprey, and I think I would be making a error in judgment if I followed this as the uniform guide. This is not to criticize other people. Like, if you have used this, you've just said, look, I'm going to look at the Ospreys, that's my uniform guide, and go for it, that's fine. But I think this speaks to what Ralph Astley has mentioned in some of his videos, which is where we sort of look at Osprey as like the gold standard of uniform guides and just assume that everything's correct in it, and then we just replicate the problem over time, right? So, and then a sort of consensus develops around this being the correct uniform. And whether or not it's correct doesn't matter. It becomes a sort of truth based on sort of consensus rather than a truth based on actual history. So I can't even really answer my own question. So, this is sort of why I wanted to have this discussion. I think there's a few things I wanted to kind of talk about here. One of them was we don't always know as much as we think we know about these periods or this history. We also need to be very careful what we use as our sources. I think it's very convenient to look at Osprey and say, well, they've done the research for me, I'll just copy what they've got. Because as we can see, even within 2 Osprey men-at-arms, they're not agreeing with each other. So the one from 1973 doesn't agree from the one from 1991. And we might say, well, the one from the 1970s is likely less accurate. Maybe 1991 has more research put into it, or has newly discovered research into it, but I'm not convinced that that's necessarily true. But as you can see, I'm at a bit of an impasse on that front. So thank you for bearing with me. I know this has probably not been the most interesting discussion, but certainly as wargamers, I think this is the kind of thing that we oftentimes talk about. So that's what I wanted to discuss today, was this thing about the collars primarily on the greatcoats. and then the shoulder straps and the way that everything hangs together. Because, like I said earlier, I think it's highly unlikely that a collar patch, sorry, and a shoulder strap would not match. I think it would look disorganized to the eye. And given that the Russians seem to have been very obsessed at this period in time with sort of visual perfection and like drill perfection over and above effective actual combat efficiency, it would appear to me that there might be some dissonance going on here. So anyway, this is where this discussion ends, and then I want to just finish up with a few other bits and bobs. So I may have misspoken. Having gone through this video and edited the piece that I'd recorded earlier, I've decided to actually just stop it here and keep this as a single discussion video, and not take up any more of your time. So I just want to thank you for watching, and again, as always, comments are very welcome. If you have anything to add to the discussion, or if you have some insights that perhaps I have missed, please do let me know. I am all ears, as I've said before, and I look forward to hearing from everybody, and I hope that you guys are having a great time as the summer winds to an end in the Northern Hemisphere and as it just gets started in the Southern. Take care.